You've proven that hybrid agile methods can actually work in brownfield environments, which is something that many in the industry still kind of see as too rigid for that kind of flexibility. What inspired you to try blending agile into those traditional settings, and what surprised you about how teams responded to that effort?
A hybrid agile methodology can really pay off and pay dividends, because what you can do is become more, as a team, be more flexible. And so what really stood out to me is, from a methodology standpoint, stand-up meetings, daily meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page, keeping alignment to what's important.
If you're an AEC project manager, you're going to have to build trust with your project team members and keep them motivated over very long and intensive projects. Well, in today's episode, I have with me Tony Barreras. Tony is a PMP. He is the owner at AJB Enterprise Holdings, and he has over 3 decades of project and program management experience. And in this episode, he's going to talk about building trust with your team members. He's going to talk about driving innovation, and he's also going to talk about how he's used agile methodologies in traditional project management environments where people just didn't think it could be done. They thought it was too rigid. He's going to talk about all of those things, and he's going to help you to become a better PM and better engage your team members. I'm Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC PM Podcast. Now, I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show for today, Tony Barreras. Tony is a PMP. He is the owner at AJB Enterprise Holdings. Tony, welcome to the AEC Project Management Podcast.
Well, thank you, Anthony.
So I'm excited to have you here. I'm looking forward to kind of jumping in. But before we dive into some topics related to project management, maybe you could tell our audience a little bit about your background, Tony, and kind of the path that led you to program and project management across, such diverse industries.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm actually a Texas A&M grad. I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I started my career at Bechtel. I really enjoyed the work, but I got tired of the grind of the calculus and doing short circuit and equipment sizing calculations. But at an early on in my career, I got an opportunity to work as a follow-on engineer out in the tail end of a wastewater treatment facility project. It was a pretty large project. And one of the things I really enjoyed was the cadence of the problem solving and removing obstacles, very similar to what you do as a project manager. It wasn't long before, early in my career, I moved on to Honeywell and transitioned into a project engineer role. And that's where I became a project manager. And one of the great things that was happening within Honeywell at the time was they were developing their global project management methodology. And I had the opportunity to learn how to be a project manager at the same time they were going through the process of documenting that methodology. And, one of the things that a lot of project managers have is when they get started, is they get thrown into managing a project and develop bad habits as they get kind of tossed in the lion's den. And they do a lot of what we call winging it when they get assigned as a project manager for the first time. But for me, I had the opportunity to learn and go through my PMP certification early on as I learned and got exposed to projects at Honeywell. And I also had the opportunity to work on a bunch of smaller projects. And my exposure to the smaller projects and being able to kind of get that feedback loop pretty early on really taught me what success looked like as far as how projects were delivered. Built my confidence. It really kind of gave me motivation to do more. And because they were recognizing me for my successes at the time, giving me more responsibility, I even got the opportunity to roll out new tools as a leader of a small group of project controllers. And we were kind of like a beta test group for Honeywell and their global project management methodology. A little bit kind of continuing on in my career, I got to move to, I was thrown right in the middle of a very large program in an oil field services giant, 300 project members on this team. And they were put together to integrate 7 different companies that the organization consisted of. They were operating as independent companies, and they put together a large program to oversee this integration as well as an ERP system upgrade. So they were rolling out and touching everything from sales, operations, inventory, and manufacturing, supply chain, engineering, project management, even the internal side with new HR. They were rolling out SAP and an entire new IT organization. It was a real eye-opener for me on how to go from a super detailed project management mindset to a much higher level strategic planning and setting up multiple project managers for execution. And for me, it gave me an idea or kind of whet my appetite, if you will, on what program management was all about. And it really just got me excited about delivering projects and enabling project organizations to be successful. And so I got to spend some time from there going on to a high-tech business that manufactured devices that leveraged wireless networks for supporting retail and warehousing, inventory management, and logistics and manufacturing. It was a real exciting type of project environment because it was new technology. Got to learn a lot about how wireless networks worked. I was kind of excited with my electrical engineering background. And then, from there, Anthony, I got to move into a logistics company and learned a lot about developing the technologies that support freight forwarding. And I got exposed to a wide array of different types of projects there, really touched on a lot of the IT and the systems side of that organization. They were similar to that previous organization. There were companies that had been kind of hodgepodged together to create a global freight forwarding company. So there's a lot of projects around integrating in the back end to make technology work. That was real interesting because you worked with a lot of different groups, a lot of different technologies, which really set up sort of a need for a project management organization within that business. Eventually I settled down and got into a large EPCM company. If you look back at my background, I spent 18 years at Wood. It's a engineering, procurement, construction management organization, supports oil and gas and energy projects. And for the most part of my career there, I was a project management consultant or leader in the organization responsible for project delivery processes, for training project managers, and the development of project leaders.
That's great. I mean, you had a lot of different experience. And I think one thing to really take away from what Tony said there is, first of all, I know a lot of our listeners are probably in the design world or have been in the design world. So you could definitely make a transition from design, getting into project management and then ultimately into program management. And I think Tony kind of gave a good explanation or description of kind of the difference from project management, which is obviously specific to one project, to program management, where you might be overviewing, multiple projects, multiple project managers and helping and supporting them, which again can be kind of a progression that you can take as a project manager as you like project management, you're interested in it, you want to take it to a higher level, take it to some more complexity. There are definitely some opportunities for you there. So that's something that's interesting just about kind of Tony's background. But Tony, you've proven that hybrid agile methods can actually work in brownfield environments, which is something that many in the industry still kind of see as too rigid for that kind of flexibility. What inspired you to try blending agile into those traditional settings, and what surprised you about how teams responded to that effort?
Well, first of all, it kind of depends on your definition of hybrid agile. That can mean a lot to a lot of different people. Agile is actually an umbrella of methodologies that are really about better accommodating projects with poor scope definition. And if you think about the way the life cycle of a project within the oil and gas, world, if you will, there's a lot of things we don't know about the project and the details of the project early on. So there are opportunities to use agile type methodologies. And when you talk about specifically brownfield scopes, there's two things happening there. There's, an operating facility in the background. And I just to kind of assume everyone that the audience knows what the difference between greenfield and brownfield projects are. Just real quickly, greenfield, of course, starting from basically open field, new facility. Brownfield, working in an existing facility. So you're working in an operating environment that has things that happen all the time, shutdowns and emergency shutdowns, or just need for certain systems to be repaired or maintained. And so the team that typically supports a brownfield environment, at least, my experience, they have a list, a backlog of work that needs to be done. And it's not just one big project. It's usually a number of different types of projects. So there are operating facilities that tackle big overhaul, like a new unit or new technology in a unit. And those are a little bit different. It might be treated more like a traditional project. But really what works well is where you've got that list of maintenance projects and you're putting together a set of projects or things you're going to get done during a planned shutdown. That's where a hybrid agile methodology can really pay off and pay dividends, because what you can do is become more, as a team, be more flexible. And so what really stood out to me is from a methodology standpoint, stand-up meetings, daily meetings to make sure everybody's on the same page, keeping alignment to what's important, so that as things change in that environment, you can quickly adjust. It also helped people communicate, because often in a brownfield environment, people are working on, the same documentation, same documents. And so they can be people all working in or different disciplines, working on different projects within like same PNID or the same set of documents that support that particular system. And what it affords is better communication, better tracking, and better progressing for work it's hard when you're in a brownfield environment, because you don't always have a discrete deliverable. You're going and updating a particular deliverable or document. And so that update might be very brief. It might be very extensive. And it really opens the door for, it's primarily better communication, what I saw. So we just found that, we tried it on a couple of different brownfield projects and saw success. And it wasn't like an overhaul of the way we did our work. It was just complementing a lot of the work that we did. And you asked about what are some of the things that surprised me about how the team responded. People at first were very resistant to change. And that shouldn't surprise people, because you're dealing with engineers, and engineers and designers, they tend to be very fixed in their ways. So that shouldn't surprise you. But, when you try to convince somebody of something that's valuable, that'll make their life easier, and how hard it can be to drag them through that process, there was a lot of organizational change management that we didn't emphasize. So we had to do some starts and stops to get that to move forward.
So, Tony, just for our listeners, when we say agile in terms of project management, the way I think of it, and I'd like to hear your take on it, is it's more of a flexible approach, meaning, maybe you're trying something and then you're making adjustments along the way, as opposed to just a more traditional, like, this is how we're doing it. It's very rigid and so on and so forth. Is that accurate?
Well, you don't try to change the methodology that you choose in the middle of the execution of, like, say, a particular scope of work. Really, Agile is about the ability, yes, to choose a methodology, but it's about the ability to be flexible with your scope. And so you define your scope into chunks that are like easier to shuffle around and you're delivering in iterative, kind of sprints. So there's a lot of terminology here that not everybody's going to be familiar with unless you've done some training in the methodology. But let's pick one. Scrum is the one that most people use, and when they hear Agile, they're really thinking Scrum methodology. So you'll hear terms about running in sprints and iterations and breaking, having epic and stories and functional requirements and, breaking things down. It really comes down to establishing a rate at which work is done. They use the word velocity, and making the work, defining the work into meaningful chunks. So like if you know you're going to touch a particular, existing drawing, you're going to spend 2 to 4 hours. We're going to define that one way. And then if you're going to spend 2 days on that, you're going to define that a different way. And you can then categorize your work that way across the whole and track the rate at which work is done. And it gives you a lot better visibility at how quickly work is being done. And that's really an important thing, because sometimes you kind of feel like it's difficult to track because you've got multiple people revving the same drawing for different systems that they're working on.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I've heard good things about it. Obviously, I think, like, to your point, not a lot of project managers, unless they've had kind of the training on it, may be aware of it. But it's good to hear that you've been able to apply it maybe in situations that people previously haven't been able to, which shows you that, you can be flexible as a project manager, and it may be very beneficial for your stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Tony, why is psychological safety important in team performance when we're talking about projects? And what role does kind of personal connections play in kind of creating that environment?
Well, Anthony, what I have found is that as people are working, they all are working towards common set of goals, right? And in order to get to that place, we begin to realize that when it's too big to do individually, we need others to get there to do it. And so then hence a team is necessary to get the work done. Well, if each person on that team has a different understanding as to what they're going to get done in a day, or what it means I'm going to get done by the end of the day or the end of the week, if they don't all have a common understanding, there's a lack of cohesion in that team. So what's really critical is establishing what I like, it's just very simple. It's trust between individuals on the team. So that's where, when you had mentioned psychological safety, in order to develop that understanding, that common understanding, you need to have trust, so that people, when they say, we're going to get this done by the end of the week, that all means the same thing. In order to get there, in order for everyone to agree on the same progress or the same understanding of what that means, you have to establish trust. Well, in order to establish trust, you have to build a team. You have to build relationships. We don't get trust. Everyone's familiar with the storming, forming, the process you go through for developing a team, right? Well, when you go through developing trust, people need to feel like they can talk to you about the things that are going on inside of them that are what I would call obstacles to getting work done. So, and each individual has different, let's say, thresholds of pain as to what they can, how far they can push before they need to get up and walk away from something, or they need to quit for the day because of other pressures in life. And so you combine an environment that people feel it's okay to talk to you about these things. And you're not just saying, I don't care, I'm worried more about when this is due. As a project leader, or a discipline leader or a project engineer, I'm sitting there putting pressure on you. You've got this drawing to get done by, I don't care, it's got to be done by 4 today. That type of mentality breaks, they become afraid to tell you about the things that are keeping them from actually getting the work done. So you get kind of that passive aggressive type environment. Well, if you want to break all that down and work together as a team, you've got to establish personal relationship. You need to care about people. People need to know that you actually are going to listen to them when they tell you about something inside that's keeping them from getting the work done. And then you begin to uncover some of the dynamics between team members. So where there might be conflict or communication barriers, or, they're not getting basic flow of information. That becomes much easier when, one, they trust you as a leader and they know they can sit down and tell you, and they know that you care about what they're about to say. And that the second part is you have to do something. You have to act. So those are all pieces that kind of go into establishing trust, which leads to you and I on the same page. When you say, I'm going to get something done, or I'm going to work my butt off and I'm going to put in 120% to get this done, Well, we have a common understanding. And if you say that to me, I can trust that you're going to do it. And you can trust me that I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to end up at the goal, the finish line early, waiting on you, wondering what happened. Where did you go?
That's great. Yeah. And I think, and I've said this a million times on this podcast, but the biggest misnomer about project management, it doesn't have the word people in the term. And,
Yeah.
People are the biggest part of getting projects run effectively and efficiently. And what I think is nice about what Tony's talking about here is a lot of our listeners work in, consulting firms or private organizations where they're probably working with the same team on a lot of projects. So if they're willing to invest in those relationships and learn about your team members, I think you can really, build a team that has that safety and that trust that you can really execute on your projects in a positive way because of the relationships that you're building. And so I think, doing some of the things that Tony's talking about here is worth the investment of your time as a project manager, as a program manager, because number one, I think your work is going to go more smoothly because you're building those relationships, and you're going to, if someone does have to deal with something like Tony suggests, you're going to understand what that is. You're going to be able to work with them, and you're going to, be able to account for that. But I think also, those people that you're leading right now are going to hopefully become project managers and program managers themselves for your organization. And, you're kind of leading by example in terms of how to build a team the right way, thinking about, psychological safety, thinking about trust. And if you can do that effectively, you're also building and growing great project leaders in the long term.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. So Tony, you've done a lot of mentoring with project managers. You've led training programs like you mentioned earlier. What strategies have you found to be effective for kind of maintaining long-term team motivation through things like recognition and constructive feedback? Can you talk about those things? Because I think those are really important.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. As I mentioned earlier about listening and developing that relationship with the individuals on your team, the majority of the projects that I've been involved with, every one of those individuals had a functional leader somewhere in the organization. They didn't directly report to me. And as a result, they had, if you will, there's a little bit of a pull on their career aspirations versus my project aspirations. And so one of the things I found that really worked, if you want your team members to be excited about your project, especially if it's, 12, 18 months or longer, you need to tie what you want them to do with what they want to do with their career. And the best way to do that, because, if you sit down with somebody on your project and if you want them, I mean, yes, you've already developed trust, but if you want them to be honest with you about where they're headed in their career, and if it sounds like it doesn't match your project, they're going to start distancing themselves from you. And they're not going to be excited about working on your project. And you can control that early. If you do, don't be closed-minded about what people can do on your project. You can motivate them to do great work for you by understanding what it is that they desire to get accomplished, in their career. And so to me, you get together with the functional leader. And usually there's a functional leader that has 2 or 3 people on your team. You just sit down with them and you talk to them about all 3 and say, hey, what do these people aspire to? When you did your performance review with them last, what were the things that you saw that they were eager to become? And you take good notes and you look at your overall project plan and you find ways to fit them on where you can align the work that they're doing as stretch goals towards their career. I've done that many times with people on my projects. I'll tell you though, it's not always easy. You've got to develop a relationship with the functional leader as well. That's really, really important, is how well you relate to the different functional leaders. So, and that's a key to success for any project managers, to be close to the functional leaders. You'll get better assignments, better people. It's super important. At the end of the day, if you show them that you care about them, you've looked out for not just what your project needs, but what they want, they're going to love to work for you. They'll want to be on your projects, and they'll fight for you when the time comes, and they'll push their own limits to make sure you're successful.
That's great. No, I think that's awesome. And I think that, you know, getting feedback is so important. And I think it's something that sometimes as PMs, we don't think about it. We're in our projects, we got a lot of stuff going on, scheduling, budgeting, working with our team members. But your team members, that feedback's very valuable to them in terms of developing their skill sets. And like I said, growing into the project manager that they want to grow into. So again, I think it's one of those things over a long project. We talked about building the relationships with them. We talked about the trust. And I think that feedback also gives trust because if, my manager is willing to give me like honest feedback, whether it's good or bad, it's going to be helpful for me to grow. So I think that those are things that we need to think about as PMs and constantly try to continue to remind ourselves to do regularly.
Yeah, Anthony, you raised a good point. And one of the things that's important is you develop trust, as you develop the relationship, you learn to listen, that they'll reciprocate. And you'll be able to very succinctly say, hey, I really need you to do this. And when you say it that way, for areas where they're struggling, they're maybe not delivering, you just need to be very clear and direct and avoiding the beating around the bush. This is probably the area that people struggle with the most, is how to address conflict and areas of where you have a team member that's not achieving their goal, your goal for your project. And if you're aware, you've done the research, you know how this will affect their career, you can tie that in as you communicate with them. Hey, if you step up in this area, you're going to see rewards over time, and it's going to get you closer to your goals. And I'm going to help you get there. But you craft that message around areas that they're weak in.
That's great. Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And again, it's that extra from the PM, right? That extra investment in your team that's going to kind of build your team to be stronger. And like you said, build the trust, because if my leader, project manager, supervisor is looking out for my development, right, that's what's going to get me committed to the project, get me committed to coming to work every day and working for that person because they kind of believe in me and they're trying to support me. That's what I found.
Exactly. 100%. You're not looked, you don't see them as a commodity.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, Tony, your innovation network initiative generated over 400 ideas in its first year. First of all, maybe you could explain the initiative, what made it successful, and just maybe talk about how AEC leaders can really create that kind of culture that encourages grassroots innovation.
So it was just kind of like a perfect storm when things came together. When we pulled this together, we were actually working on a lessons learned methodology, trying to improve lessons learned. And that's really just taking things that weren't working well, making them work well, or identifying ways to do project work better. So we were actually at the forefront of progressive learning as far as just trying to be active learning, right? And while we were writing those procedures, the organization was looking for ways to incorporate innovation. And so, interestingly, these two things have very strong connection and parallel. Innovation is about doing things that aren't being done, doing new things to push your organization to new places. Well, if you think about it from the perspective of a lesson learned, it's the same concept. You're not doing something well and you can do it better, or you can, do something that will avoid problems or issues. Well, that's what innovation's about. And engineers and designers by nature are problem solvers, and they're always thinking about how to do something better. And if you give them an easy environment, so the way we made our way towards success is we simplified the way you captured an idea. We made it super easy to document an idea. It shouldn't take longer than 2 minutes to put an idea down. And so, because they've got these things, they've been noodling them for a while. And when you open the door, you'll get a flood of things that come through. You have to keep them focused. You have to let them know it's on you to tell me why we should do this. And so you need to give me a business value proposition in order for this to go forward. So they need to not just say, hey, it'd be great if we did whatever. They need to understand the problem it's solving or what it's going to contribute to the business. So The last part that was super critical as far as the way we defined them is you need to give us an idea as to how hard you think this is going to implement, to implement, right? You can't just sit there and say, well, if we go to the moon, and we can harvest, the minerals on the moon. Well, yeah, okay. Let's come back to reality here.
Right.
So the big thing that made our innovation network successful was making it easy to get that idea on the table. But we also needed to make sure that leadership were bought into the idea of being innovative. So it's really important, and this is basic stakeholder management. You've got to get a key stakeholder on board early, and they need to be your messenger. You can't, even as much as you love innovation, to be honest, you can't be the person, the face. You need someone. You need that sports figure that everybody recognizes, right? It doesn't, just because you have a lot of passion for it isn't going to cross the notoriety. It's going to get them to look at it. And you need to have, you need to have a campaign and a message, right? So we did those things, and we ran a campaign across the organization. We incorporated into the process basic ideas behind organizational change management. So as ideas sort of surfaced, we then vetted those ideas, and we asked ourselves, how hard is this going to be adopted by the organization? Because that played a role in prioritizing ideas. The other thing that really made us successful is I identified a Six Sigma expert to lead the operations of this work. They come configured in their brain already with the how to break an idea down, make it implementable, and prove it out. If you know anything about Six Sigma or say lean, the lean process, you understand how to simplify, how to deliver value, and how to vet ideas quickly, and how to, let's say, correlate the variables that go into making an idea successful, delivering the actual value of the idea. That's what's critical. A couple of pointers that we learned early on as I was doing research about innovation: the things that are game changers are not often the ideas that are the most popular. They're usually the things that one person contributes. A lot of people like to get a bunch of people in the room, brainstorm stuff, and do a lot of voting and what's the most, what does everyone agree? It's often the thing out on the fringe that'll deliver the most value. And so you've got to just be able to process that, think that through. What made it carry through, the momentum that carried it through, is that we made it fun. We celebrated success. When somebody had an idea, again, we were using Agile methodologies to deliver ideas, to be clear. We got in and we moved fast, and we got ideas moving iteratively, like sprints. We would recruit people from the organization to contribute time, and we broke it up in a way that we divided the work so we could get it done quickly. And then we celebrated success. We took pictures, we brought them with the leader, and we made a big deal out of it. We had success stories. We published, half page, 1 page type success stories. It was really easy to do. We had, you think these things through, you make templates for these things. So it's not a lot of effort, because if it's too hard, it'll die. So you had to make it repeatable and fast.
That's great. Yeah. All that's great. And I think that the reason that I asked Tony to talk about this a little bit is because I think that everybody wants to be innovative today. But the challenge that I always find is that, like Tony said, anyone could say, let's go to the moon, right? But getting it into something that's you can execute, and that it's financially feasible, and that it's schedule-wise viable, and all these things can work, is the difficult part. So I think for the PMs out there, you really need to think about that. You want to drive your team towards innovation, but at the same time, it has to be realistic. So you have to come up with some kind of a process or a back and forth where, kind of like this incubator, or it's kind of like this initiative that Tony talked about, where people can throw ideas out and you could brainstorm and get the ideas, but then you have to say, how do we make these ideas a reality in a way that's doable financially, time-wise, etc. So for those of you out there that are looking to maybe get really creative with your projects, which I think could be valuable and I think could bring a lot of value to your clients and your stakeholders, I think that's great. But make sure that you have a process to take those innovative ideas and distill them down to things that are practical and feasible, and then get them to go to the next step. Because like Tony's saying, you can just lose momentum, things will die unless there's like a pathway to actually get it done. And that's really, really important for PMs. All right, Tony, now it's time for our final question here. We call it the PM pitfalls question. What would you say is maybe one of the biggest pitfalls that you see project managers fall into in our industry, and any recommendations for maybe overcoming it or avoiding it or minimizing it?
So this will be pretty pointed. Project managers tend to get in the way of their team. All right. So that can take different forms. Their ego. They think they're the only one who can communicate to key stakeholders. Their desire to be right. I've seen a project manager argue with me about electrical design. No business arguing with me about electrical design. But he was super smart. Many patents under this guy's belt. Just none of them in electrical design. It is so important that as a project manager, you deliver on your word. You say you're going to do something for somebody on your team, you deliver it. If you say you're going to help them by taking that obstacle away, you make sure it gets done. So it's really important. They need to believe that what your word is golden. You can say, don't worry about that, I'll take care of it. And then if it's later, they find out it's still still there. Yeah, you'll lose the team. This is so obvious, but you gotta listen. You gotta be still and listen. You'll find that much drama will diffuse itself. Sometimes you don't have to do anything, just listen.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that's so important, because it goes back to what Tony has spoken about today several times, which is building that trust, building your credibility with your team, and, being able to listen to them, understand their concerns, take action on those is really important. And if you're missing out on those things, you're going to miss that opportunity to, again, build another level of trust with those team members that's going to help you in the long run. So, Tony, you gave us some really great information today for our listeners. I want to thank you for spending some time with us here on the AEC PM podcast. You can find Tony on LinkedIn and connect with him. He is a very experienced PM. He's done project management, program management, and he really shared a wealth of knowledge with us today. So, Tony, thanks again so much for spending some time with us here on the podcast.
Absolutely, Anthony. It was my pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tony, a brilliant guy. I hope you could take some of what he has done in project management and apply it to your projects and your teams. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help technical professionals become great project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.